The world is shifting, and this time, it's not just another diplomatic headline. It's a global economic tremor, one that's shaking the very balance of power between East and West. In Washington, anxiety grows behind closed doors. In Beijing, confidence radiates across the halls of power. And between them lies one of the most defining standoffs of the 21st century. China has just defied the United States again. But this time, it's not about trade tariffs or military posturing in the South China Sea. It's about control over global money, influence, and the future of economic leadership. As the US scrambles to secure a staggering $100 billion to support its debt obligations and international commitments, China has made a bold move, one that could completely reshape how nations view American financial dominance. The tension began quietly, with Washington requesting Beijing's cooperation on a series of financial and trade-related matters aimed at stabilizing international markets. But in a calculated and confident response, Chinese officials pushed back. They refused to yield to US demands. They refused to support America's attempt to secure funds that would, indirectly, reinforce the dollar's supremacy. Instead, China doubled down on its own strategy, strengthening its partnerships with BRICS nations, accelerating de-dollarization, and promoting the use of the yuan in international trade settlements. In plain terms, China is telling the world it no longer needs to play by Washington's rules. Let's rewind a bit. For decades, the United States has relied on its global financial influence, particularly through the dollar, to project power across continents. Whether through trade sanctions, loans, or defense spending, the dollar has been the lifeblood of US strength. But now, that dominance faces its biggest challenge in decades. China's rejection doesn't just signal a refusal, it represents a wider movement. Nations across Asia, Africa, and South America are quietly aligning with Beijing's vision of a multipolar world, one where the US dollar no longer dictates the rhythm of global trade. This shift didn't happen overnight. It began years ago, with China's long-term strategy. Investing in infrastructure across developing nations, expanding its Belt and Road Initiative, and slowly building an economic network powerful enough to rival the Western system. And now, that network is showing its strength. When Washington requested cooperation, China saw an opportunity to send a message. A message that echoed from Beijing to Brussels, from Moscow to Riyadh. The age of US economic monopoly is coming to an end. Inside the US, this has triggered a financial scramble. Government officials are rushing to secure new funding sources, both domestically and internationally. But the timing couldn't be worse. Rising debt levels, political gridlock in Congress, and growing concerns over inflation have made the US financial position more fragile than ever. Meanwhile, China is playing the long game, investing heavily in digital currency, rare earth supply chains, and energy independence. It's also strengthening financial ties with countries like Saudi Arabia, India, and Brazil, all members of the expanding BRICS alliance. And here's the real shocker: recent economic reports suggest that the BRICS bloc could soon control over 45% of global GDP when adjusted for purchasing power parity. That's a near-deadly blow to Western economic dominance. Every move China makes now seems to be perfectly calculated, a step toward financial independence from the Western system that once defined global trade. Even major economies are starting to question whether the US dollar can continue to serve as the world's reserve currency. Russia now trades energy in rubles and yuan. Saudi Arabia is considering yuan-based oil contracts. Even Latin American countries are exploring BRICS-backed financial systems. The world is watching as America races against time, trying to raise $100 billion in funds while the rest of the world quietly moves away from its orbit. But the story isn't just about money. It's about global power and how quickly it can shift. For years, the US used its dollar-based system as a tool of influence and control. But now those same tools are being questioned, resisted, and in some cases, outright rejected. China's refusal to comply with US financial demands is not just political, it's symbolic. It's Beijing telling Washington, your era of unchecked control is over. In response, American leaders have started to explore new alliances and strategies, from trade agreements with Europe and Japan to closer ties with India. But the world has changed. The US no longer holds the monopoly on global cooperation. In fact, China's strategy is winning quiet support from other nations frustrated by Western economic pressures. They see in Beijing a model of resilience, a nation that built its power not through wars, but through trade, production, and patience. What's happening now is not just an economic standoff. It's a rewriting of the global order. China is betting on the future, a future where digital currencies, regional trade agreements, and non-Western financial systems define global economics. And the US? It's racing against time, against debt, and against the very system it once controlled. The $100 billion Washington is trying to secure may provide short-term relief, but it won't fix the deeper issue: the decline of confidence in American financial supremacy. Meanwhile, China continues to rise with quiet determination, strategic vision, and the support of nations tired of a one-sided world. As Beijing continues to defy Western expectations, a new chapter unfolds, one where financial independence becomes the new measure of power. And while the US continues its urgent race to maintain its global influence, the balance of the 21st century world may already be shifting eastward. A storm is brewing in global economics. Not with missiles or armies, but with money, alliances, and ambition. China's defiance has set the stage. The US scramble for $100 billion is only the beginning. And what happens next could determine the fate of global power for generations. Because in this new world, control is no longer about who has the biggest military. As the camera pans over the glittering skylines of Beijing, Shanghai, and Shenzhen, the image of a confident, forward-moving China emerges. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Washington's lights burn late into the night. Analysts, senators, and economic advisors gathered in urgent meetings, debating what went wrong and how to regain control. The race for $100 billion is not just a financial emergency, it's a symbol of America's growing uncertainty. For decades, the world depended on US stability. But now, even allies are beginning to question whether that stability can last. In Europe, policymakers whisper about alternatives, about new trade networks that don't rely on Washington's approval. In Africa, governments are signing long-term development deals with China, bypassing Western lenders entirely. And in the Middle East, energy giants are quietly aligning their economic future with Beijing's expanding influence. It's about who controls the money and who controls the future. Only time will tell. What's certain is this: the 21st century will not belong to a single superpower. It will belong to those who understand how to adapt, those who can balance ambition with cooperation and dominance with respect. China's defiance today may be seen as bold, even reckless by some. The world is standing at the edge of transformation. Old systems are crumbling, new ones are quietly rising. And in that silence, beneath the chaos of markets and headlines, a new global structure is taking shape. In Beijing's financial district, screens glow with numbers and currency indexes. The yuan, once seen as secondary to the dollar, is now being discussed in global boardrooms as a future reserve currency. Banks in Asia and Africa are opening yuan-based accounts, while Europe cautiously diversifies its trade settlements. This is not coincidence, it's design. China's refusal to bow to US demands is more than an act of defiance. It's the unveiling of a master plan, decades in the making, one rooted in patience, discipline, and the understanding that global dominance is not seized overnight, it's built quietly, layer by layer. Washington's response is intense meetings, emergency funding talks, secret briefings with allies. Officials reassure the public that everything is under control. But behind the calm expressions and polished speeches, there's a growing realization. The world no longer responds to America the way it once did. When the US calls, fewer nations rush to answer. When China speaks, more nations listen. And as the US scrambles to secure $100 billion, it faces an uncomfortable truth: that the debt it carries today is not just financial. It's also political. For years, the United States' dominance rested on confidence in its leadership, its economy, its military strength. But confidence is a fragile currency. Once shaken, it spreads uncertainty faster than any financial collapse. Beijing knows this. Every move it makes, every statement it releases, is part of a psychological chess game designed to challenge not just the US economy, but its identity as the world's stabilizing force. In global capitals, leaders are recalculating. They're asking questions they never dared ask before. What happens if the dollar loses its throne? What happens if China leads the next generation of financial systems? And quietly, those answers are starting to form. In South America, trade deals are being signed in local currencies. In Africa, China-funded railways and ports are giving nations new lifelines independent of Western control. In the Middle East, oil contracts denominated in yuan are becoming more common. The world is adjusting not because it wants to, but because it must. The global economy is like an ocean. And for years, the US controlled the tides. But now, new currents are forming deep, powerful, and unstoppable. Every time China refuses US pressure, that current grows stronger. Every time Washington struggles to secure funding, the waves shift a little more toward the east. And make no mistake, these shifts are not temporary. They are structural. The US economy remains mighty, but its rivals have learned from decades of observation. They've seen the rise and fall of empires. They've watched as nations overextended, printing money, borrowing endlessly, assuming the world would never change. But history always changes. And now, it's changing again. Back in Washington, tension simmers beneath the surface. Economic advisors talk of resilience, innovation, and reform. But others whisper of decline, a slow erosion of influence masked by optimism. In contrast, China's strategy remains patient, methodical. It doesn't seek confrontation, it seeks control. Control through trade, through energy, through data, through trust. In the global south, that trust is growing. China offers development without lectures, investment without interference. It's a model that appeals to nations tired of conditional aid and political strings. And so, the US finds itself fighting not just for money, but for loyalty, for influence, for relevance. The $100 billion Washington races to secure is a temporary solution for a permanent problem. The real issue lies deeper in a global system that is slowly, but surely, shifting away from the American center. And this is the reality no one in Washington wants to say out loud. Because admitting that the world is changing means acknowledging that America's power is no longer absolute. It's relative. And relative power is fleeting. Meanwhile, Beijing continues to act with calm precision. No announcements, no dramatic speeches, just steady progress. New digital trade corridors. New payment networks. New alliances. Every move perfectly aligned with one purpose, ensuring that when the next financial era begins, China is already sitting at the head of the table. In the background, global observers watch with quiet fascination. They see a future forming where influence isn't decided by who has the most money today, but by who can build the strongest foundation for tomorrow. And China has been laying that foundation brick by brick. The question now is, can Washington rebuild faster than Beijing rises? Can the US reinvent its economic power before it's eclipsed? Because the race for $100 billion is not just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about the soul of global leadership. Who defines progress? Who controls credit? Who shapes the world's next economic chapter? The answers are still unfolding, but for the first time in a century, the US is no longer the unquestioned center of that story. And the more it pushes, the more resistance it meets. The more it demands, the more independence others seek. This is the paradox of power. The harder it tries to hold on, the faster it slips away. And China simply waits. The global stage is shifting beneath our feet. What was once a predictable world with the United States steering the global economy is now becoming a battlefield of influence, innovation, and ideology. China's defiance didn't start a war. It revealed one that was already happening silently through trade, currency, and control. Washington's race for $100 billion is more than a financial scramble. It's a sign that the old system, the dollar-dominated world order, is reaching its limits. And in its place, a new reality is emerging, one that no single nation can command. China has built a strategy based on patience, partnerships, and persistence. America is still the giant, powerful, capable, and influential. But it's facing something it hasn't faced in generations. A rival that doesn't need to fight to win. Because this new era isn't decided by weapons or armies. It's decided by influence, trade routes, and digital economies. And in that race, Beijing has already taken the lead in silence. The question now is not whether China and the US will clash. It's how the world will adapt when the center of gravity finally shifts. Will the United States reinvent itself using innovation and diplomacy to rebuild global trust? Or will it cling to the past, watching as others write the next chapter of history? One thing is certain. The era of unquestioned American dominance is fading. The new era is being written in multiple languages, multiple currencies, and multiple alliances. And as Washington races to secure its billions, Beijing moves steadily toward its vision. A world where power is shared, not dictated. And where the East stands shoulder to shoulder with the West, not beneath it. The tides of history are changing and they do not turn back. Each pulse of light carries the message of transformation. The global order is not collapsing, it's evolving. This is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of a new world.